clean up through.
Go ahead. Let me start.
We're going to call this meeting to order. We have two additions. We have the active transportation resolution as well as a video conferencing policy. I would ask if there are any other additions. Hearing none, I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda as amended with the two additions.
Moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? Okay, the agenda is approved with the two additions. We will now offer up a presentation for the benefit of council with regard to our accessibility plan. I'd like to take a quick moment to introduce Matthew Higgins, who co-chairs the Port Hawkesbury Accessibility Advisory Committee with me. I'd also like to acknowledge that Gordy Snook, as a staff member on our committee, who will also be joining us in the presentation. And I also want to acknowledge Councillor McCrory, who also sits as a member on our accessibility committee, and Terry, who's part of our accessibility committee as well. And of course, Councillor McDougall can't be here this evening, but he also acts as alternate on our committee. And I believe he wanted to relay his support to council on behalf of this plan, knowing that he'd be absent this evening. So without further ado, I will hand things over to Matthew to begin. Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, so you just have to say next slide for Gordy.
Oh, yeah, well.
Yeah, there you go. So you're good to go on the first page.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Hi, my name is Matthew Higgins, and I'm one of the co-chairs for the Port Hawkesbury Accessibility Advisory Committee. Tonight, we have a few presenters from our committee who will be walking you through the draft accessibility plan for your consideration and for your feedback. I'll be starting off by reviewing the presentation outline for this evening. Tonight, our presentation will review our accessibility committee members that make up the Port Hawkesbury Accessibility Advisory Committee, disability and barriers, which include definition and a review of what these mean in the Nova Scotia context, overview of our work, which will discuss the work we've done as a committee to get us where we are today, providing you with a draft plan. Our approach, which is the strategy we decided to use to examine the town and consider ways to make it more accessible and a town for everyone. Themes and recommendations, which is what our committee prioritized in terms of work needed to be done, some of which will be work taken on by the town specifically, and some which will require partnership with others. Including thoughts, which will include some considerations for council to consider, then next steps, which will discuss how the committee believes we should start the plan once approved. And finally, council feedback, so we can hear from you, answer questions, and get your thoughts on the draft plan before the final plan is considered for the April 5th public meeting. Our committee is co-chaired by myself and Mayor Brenda, and we have two elected council members as well. Councillor William McCrory is a committee member, and Councillor Huey McDougall is an alternate member, and has joined us for several meetings as well. Then we have town staff supports on the committee, which includes Terry Doyle, Gordy Snook, and Melissa Warner. And the bulk of our committee is really made up of community members who have a lot of first-hand experience with accessibility disabilities. These include Kathy Cook, Aaron McDonald, Ariel Vino, Diana Porter, John F. Kennedy, Karen McLean, and Marilyn Talbot. I'll now hand things over to Brenda to review the next sections.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew. I just wanted to relay regrets on behalf of Kathy Cook. So I'm happy to cover her section on her behalf. She wanted to send her best to council, but she's feeling under the weather this evening. So as we see here, disability is defined as physical, mental, intellectual learning, or sensory impairment, including episodic disability that, in interaction with a barrier, hinders an individual's full and effective participation in society. Next slide. And here you can see the local context in terms of what it looks like in the province of Nova Scotia with regard to disability. Nova Scotians 15 years and older have at least one disability, like 30% is quite a significant number. And just some of the context that's provided in the plan as well indicates that Nova Scotia has a much higher rate of incidences disability than the rest of Canada. So the Canadian average is about 22.3%. And this represents, that's okay. This represents 229,430 people in Nova Scotia that have a disability. So it's quite important that Hawkesbury is taking on this piece of work. Next slide. And of course, there's definitely all kinds of types of disability, particularly so in Nova Scotia. So by disability type, the 4 common kinds of disabilities are pain-related, flexibility, mobility, and mental health related. Other disability types are dexterity, hearing, seeing, memory, learning, and developmental. Next slide. And barrier is defined as anything that hinders or challenges the full and effective participation in society of persons with disabilities, including a physical barrier, an architectural barrier, an information or communications barrier, an attitudinal barrier, a technological barrier, policy, or practice. Next slide. So just to give a brief overview of our work, and I just want to say that our committee is kind of like it's a committee of rock stars. We were able to get all this work done in about 6 months, which I think is pretty phenomenal. So in September, there were some other kind of informal meetings that occurred prior to September 2021, but in terms of having a full committee kind of quorum type meetings, that really our work really started in September. We started our group work, we started reviewing resources, templates of other municipal plans for accessibility. We also talked about what's our research plan, like how are we going to engage in community consultations as well as a committee. We talked about that in those early days and weeks. We also wanted to talk about a strategy, like how are we going to imagine or be able to consider how do we start looking at the town, and how do we start looking at different components of accessibility, and how do we improve the town so that it's inclusive in a town for everyone. Then we looked at a timeline, like kind of breaking down the pieces of work in terms of what do we have to get done in a timely manner to be able to have a draft before council in time for the April deadline. So then in November, we created a survey and we distributed the survey, I think in December. We identified some one-on-one interview citizens that could really bring first voice perspective to our committee members, and so that we can understand barriers and disabilities from their perspective. We identified, I believe, 19 or 20 stakeholder groups that we also engaged in one-on-one based interviews. We also worked on a social media campaign strategy to get input from the community in that way. And we also started kind of reviewing some of the earlier research that started coming in. And then in January, we continued with our research, completing our one-on-ones, completing our stakeholder engagement, completing our social media strategy. We've dug into the survey results, and we dug into some of the data that came about from the stakeholder surveys. And then come March, we finished reviewing our research. Then we started identifying some kind of some common themes that evolved as a result of reviewing all that research. We started prioritizing those common themes, and then we came up with some recommendations, and not only recommendations, but recommendations in terms of timelines. So like what recommendations can be done in the short term, like 6 months? What recommendations can be done in the medium term, which is like 12 months or so, and what can be done in the long term, which will really take anywhere between 1, 2, or 3 years. And here we are presenting our draft plan. Next slide. So this is the strategy that we chose as a team, as a committee. So all the ways we wanted to try to make sure, we were covering off as many approaches as we could in terms of understanding accessibility and understanding the potential barriers that we may have in the town and how to improve or remove some of those barriers for citizens. So of course, community consultations was the first one. Communicate information. So this is important for before, during, and after the work that we're doing with the accessibility plan. How are citizens engaged with information? Is there any barriers that citizens face in accessing any information that will really stop them from engaging in community events or whatever have you? All the ways we move is all the ways that people get from point A to point B. So that really encompassed our transit services that we have in the town, as well as our active transportation. All the ways we live is really all the programming and services we deliver as a town. All the ways we consume, all the goods and services as well is that the town delivers, but as well as the private sector as well. All the ways we work, how do we as a town of Hawkesbury look at policies around accessibility, and is there ways to collaborate with other stakeholders for persons with disabilities to find meaningful employment. In indoor and outdoor built environment, looking at all the town properties, that includes buildings and also green spaces and outdoor properties. So that was basically the strategy that we employed to be able to kind of understand what was happening in each of those approaches, and being able to move the needle on accessibility, we feel will get us to a place where we can be a more inclusive town for everyone. Next slide. Okay, over to you, Gordy.
Okay, thank you very much, George. So the first part of our, as Brenda mentioned, our themes was community consultation. So community consultations help us to understand what are some of the barriers that our citizens in the community face that prohibit them from being fully engaged and fully inclusive within the community. So we looked at that as a theme. So in the future, we said we would provide opportunities for the public group sessions on accessibility. We would continue to engage the community and accept feedback. We continue to share on social media and the Accessibility in Port Hawkesbury Facebook page. That's mainly where we got a lot of our survey results from. And our committee would continue to learn and continue to work with the town on accessibility projects. So moving forward, anything that comes as a new project to the town, we now have some accessibility teeth to put into it, and we'll move forward that way. So we're excited about that. One recommendation from council and staff through community consultations would be this accessibility plan is a living document. So we provide a pathway to ensure all community members are able to play an active role in learning about and providing feedback on accessibility in the town via a multi-communication strategy to be employed during the lifespan of this accessibility plan through 2025. Second theme would be communication information. Communicate information. So it is important to understand how citizens and stakeholders are accessing information that enables their engagement in the community. And as you see, we've got email, we've got World Wide Web, we've got newspapers, radio, TV, computer, of course. If all else fails, we have a real person at a desk. We have telephone. We've got all kinds of ways for the community to engage in consultation and move forward with their committee. So the second theme would be communicate information. Some of the highlights there would be the confusion around changing COVID-19 restrictions the last 2 years, especially for things like the walking track, which our seniors rely on in town through the winter months and the non-nice weather times. The Town of Port Hawkesbury website, mostly viewed positively, but can be improved. So we can do some improvements, and that's part of our plan, is to improve our social media footprint. Some seniors prefer the newspaper as opposed to technology, more, the World Wide Web or stuff like that. And a suggestion would be a welcome package for newcomers due to difficult to find locations, sometimes like our pool and our library. So another recommendation would be also for our short and medium and long-term recommendations would be to share the accessibility plan on our website, through social media, in the paper, and anywhere we can.
I just need to move this slide.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
should be reading from there. Include accessibility updates at every committee of the whole meeting. That's some short-term goals, short-term recommendations. Our medium-term recommendations would be to develop some inclusive communications plan, develop an accessibility page on town website, and to keep up with ongoing citizen feedback through some sort of a web-based portal. Long-term, we'd have council and staff and our committee review community feedback, update the accessibility plan annually or as needed for the term. So it is required for any municipal plan to be reviewed annually. And I'll go back to your worship.
All right. Okay, so I'll review the next two approaches. So indoor built environment, this approach helps us to explore our municipal indoor public spaces and examine these with an accessibility lens. Next slide. So some of the themes that arose through some of the feedback around indoor built environments. In general, the Civic Center is seen as a huge accessibility success, which is great. However, there were lots of feedback with regard to the need for more automatic doors. Of course, people mentioned that skyboxes aren't accessible, a need for more benches and resting areas in some of the common areas. And of course, a lot of that was, around COVID-19 and restrictions, we did remove a lot of those kind of social elements that encourage people to gather. But I believe staff have put a lot of those benches and rest areas back in place. Open the restrooms nearest the walking track, and also that our pool accessibility features are little known. We have them for quite some time, but we haven't bragged about them. Next slide. So in terms of the recommendations around indoor built environments, for the short term, we're asking staff to create a prioritized list of entryways needing automatic doors, and also to reinstall benches in the Civic Center, which has already been done, so we can check that box off. Open the washrooms nearest the walking track, because a lot of seniors use the walking track, and then that's one less barrier or entryway that they have to go through. I can check off that box, that's been done. Promote pool accessibility features, so that's something that we can look at doing in the short term. In terms of the medium term, we, as a committee, we really feel that the very first install of an automatic door really needs to be the entryway on the second story that accesses the walking track, and I'll tell you why. Because people who have mobility challenges that are accessing all of our accessibility features in the arena to watch a hockey game or whatever have you, that's their main entrance to get into that area. So they're coming up the elevator, and then they're trying to get through an entryway that doesn't have any automatic door features. That's the entryway that we'd really like to see done as soon as this is possible. And also, we really, as a committee, we thought that right now the skyboxes are really not in high demand. So before council considers making any kind of accessibility investment in that particular asset, we really see a need to grow the demand, before you want to invest in something that's got some use to it. And also just monitor the need for more benches. And in the longer term, ensure that all entryways have automatic doors, invest in skybox accessibility if demand is grown, and add more benches if needed. Next slide. In terms of outdoor built environment, this approach helps us to explore our municipal outdoor public spaces and examine these with an accessibility lens. Next slide. So in terms of themes, in general, the community park is working well, but still needs some accessibility work. Reeve Street is working well, but there's some need to do some work at intersections. The waterfront restrooms are, there was a need to have designated washrooms there. Parking issues identified at the pool, at the sports field, on Macquarie Extension, and also the Civic Center. Bramble Green accessibility issues, that was actually mentioned quite a bit. Food bank access issues, Remembrance Day venue issues, and also the view or the impediment of the original view that seniors at Sunset Manor had Children's Hospital. So these are all the outdoor built environment themes that evolved as a result of the research. Next slide. So in terms of recommendations for the short term, we are just hoping that kind of staff can work with the Strait of Canso Yacht Club just to ensure that there is that access to the washroom still being offered through the yacht club, at least in the short term. Resolve pool parking issues. So we thought that some of those issues that were happening, which mainly was people who aren't using the pool parking there versus it actually being used by folks that are signing in to get a day pass or whatever. So some of those can be resolved through just internally the staff. Bramble Green access work for the summer. So we were looking at just some kind of short-term solutions, such as an accessible viewing deck, and also making sure that we have an accessible porta potty with a clear line of access from the viewing deck to the porta potty. So those are some kind of short-term fixes we feel that could be done in time for the summer season and the concert series starting. Better parking lot and pathway snow clearing at the Civic Center for the short term is also to work on a temporary solution as per venue. Like, so for the Remembrance Day venue, let's work on making sure we have more adequate seating for folks who have mobility challenges who can't stand for long periods of time. For the medium term, we're asking to consider plans for parking access for the sports fields. Also to work with Nova Scotia Public Works. There was one issue brought to us from the Legion as a stakeholder with regard to an alignment issue. And of course, that information we can share with Public Works to see if that can be rectified. Look at, is there a possibility for clearing the view so that seniors at Sunset Manor can take in some of the Oakley ball field games again. And in the long term, look at a permanent plan for washrooms. So, whether or not it's the same washroom facility that can service both the boardwalk and Bramble Green, or whether it's two separate ones, I mean, that could be determined. Continue access work on the community park, as has been happening. We're seeing continual progress, so let's continue to see that ball rolling. And of course, any accessibility work with the community park and with the waterfront. Of course, there should be some collaboration given with the Waterfront Advisory Committee as well as the Parks, Rec, and Active Living committees. Next slide.
That's it.
Back to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'll cover all the ways we move. So we looked at, we explored how we can make it easier for people to get to where they need to go. We included straight area transit, and we also included all of our active transportation pathways. Some of the things we looked at, themes for the new intersection on Granville Street, as well as the additional stop sign at the bottom of McSween Street and Granville Street, which slows traffic and makes it much safer for pedestrians along that route. We looked at our AT trail, it's well used and it is accessible. We looked at our sidewalks. We heard that our sidewalks were the #1 accessible concern / issue. We looked at the need for more benches and rest areas along our AT trails and at our waterfront. We looked at the Old Sydney Road, Ree Street crosswalk on the 4-lane going through town, which was identified as still a dangerous crossing for not only people with mobility issues and accessibility issues, but able-bodied people also. We looked at the possibility of adding audio to the crossings along Ree Street, which would be the Old Sydney Road, Ree Street crosswalk intersection and Pitt Street crosswalk intersection, as well as McSween Street crosswalk intersection there. We looked at having our crosswalks painted when they're faded. And we looked at having some access rankings for our community trails, which identified the length of the trails and the grade of the trails and what it would take for persons with mobility issues to access those trails and know how far they have to go before they're back at the start and stuff like that. And we looked at some wildlife issues along our AT trail, which is we all know is a real issue, but we're working towards some type of a resolution.
Decided not to put droppings on the slide, but he's droppings.
So some of the short and medium long-term recommendations for all the ways we move would be a comprehensive sidewalk plan. Would be to have benches included in that sidewalk plan. We'd also look to work with Nova Scotia Public Works to resolve the issues at the Reed Street crossings where it's a 4-lane or 3-lane highway and it is still sometimes a task to get across. We looked at crosswalk paving plan. We looked to maintain and clean our AP trail of our wildlife droppings. That was short term. Medium term, we look to continue to tackle sidewalks and to fix and install as we go and repair. We looked at benches and trails, waterfront areas for additional benches and trails for rest areas. And we also look to work with Nova Scotia Public Works to add audio, as I mentioned, at the intersections on Reed Street. And we look to have our trails ranking for mobility issues. Long-term recommendations, we would aim to have every sidewalk accessible for the year 2030, which is the year the province has stated that the entire province will be accessible by 2030. They've incorporated their accessibility plan in 2017, and the year 2030 is the end date for the province to be 2030. So if you see that any reference to that year, that's what the goal we all have in mind there. And we look to have our committee work with stakeholders like the Trails Association and Straight Area Transit to promote and include and improve public knowledge for accessibility, just make people more aware of what is offered through Straight Area Transit and what is offered for accessibility through our trails. So in all the ways we live, we look to explore all the town facilitated programs, the events and activities. We have also explored the need for accessible housing. So on the slide, you'll see our recreation, a copy of our example of the recreation flyers and sports fields, even our solid waste management green card program, Granville Green, and our Tunes on the Trails program, which is all very popular. Some of the themes would be more programs are needed for seniors and people with disabilities, considering the wider definition. There's little to no accessible housing in Port Hawkesbury, so this is tough for seniors and people with disabilities. Food security is another identified challenge for some seniors and people with disabilities. Issues around access to the food bank. So our short, medium, and long-term recommendations for this category would be our committee and town staff would review the current programming and activities and events through an accessibility lens, see what we currently offer, and what we can do to adapt to the accessible community. The committee and town staff would identify all stakeholders who have a mandate for accessible housing. Medium term would be to seek community input on inclusive programs for seniors and people with disabilities. Have a community voice to see what they feel is needed. And to build an accessible housing advocacy task force and develop a plan for the same. Long-term any costs for inclusive programming not in the budget or cost reduction policies will be brought to council for approval. Currently, I don't think we have anything that exists for persons with disabilities. And we would implement an accessible housing advocacy plan to work towards that long-term goal. So all the way we consume is this still? Do I keep going?
If you like.
Or am I back to you?
It is my turn, but if you really want.
Feel free.
So the last two approaches, I promise last two, are all the ways we consume. And this approach explores access to goods and services and barriers that may exist to access for people with varying levels of ability. So of course, the town does deliver some goods and services. But obviously, a lot of goods and services are also provided by private sector, which we don't have control over as a town. Okay, next slide. So some of the themes that we heard from citizens is, this is a big one, an absence of full service gas stations. This creates barriers for seniors and people with disabilities. Many leave town to access full service gas stations. General business accessibility issues identified are a lack of automatic doors, cars parked at entryways that are blocking access points. This is happening not only at businesses, it's happening in front of apartment buildings, it's happening in some other locations as well, in front of the civic center sometimes, as well as lack of accessible washrooms in businesses. And restaurants were named particularly around accessible washrooms. Also, there was some really great advice that we received from citizens. Let's celebrate and promote businesses that are leading by example and that are really taking important steps with regard to accessibility. Next slide. So, of course, in terms of all the ways we consume, I mean, there are certain things the town can do, but in general, this, like any improvement is going to require some collaboration with some stakeholders. So this is one thing council can specifically do. So we would ask council to consider approving a letter of advocacy that we would send to local gas stations to request that they consider the provision of full service provision of full services for seniors and people with disabilities. We used to have those services in town, we no longer do, and perhaps providing that information from council could maybe get them to think about it. We can't make them, but it's nice to at least let them know that the issue exists. Also for the short term, share accessibility issues with the Strait Area Chamber of Commerce with regard to some of those general accessibility themes that we just reviewed. In the medium term, of course, follow up with gas stations to check, see if there is going to be some consideration for full service provision. Also gauge interest in an accessibility advocacy plan. You know, if there is interest with the Strait Area Chamber of Commerce, maybe there's something that the town and the chamber can do together to encourage, educate, share funding opportunities with businesses so that businesses can help, you know, become prepared, interested, and invest in accessibility in advance of 2030. For the long term, so once a team is secured, this accessibility advocacy plan can be designed, researched, and ready to be implemented in partnership with local businesses. Next. So the last approach is all the ways we work. So this approach explores how the town of Port Hawkesbury is working towards a more inclusive and accessible workplace. Next slide. So some of the themes, of course, is the town currently doesn't have an accessibility workplace policy, so we'll need to research and write one in the future. Many issues expressed by citizens regarding challenges that people with disabilities face with regard to finding meaningful employment in workplaces, and also like the workplaces that, in order for them to find meaningful employment, also need to be accessible as well. Next slide. So in terms of recommendations for the short term, we would ask our town senior staff to begin researching accessibility workplace policies and just kind of to follow it along the medium term for this particular item. So of course in the short term, you know, research what does best practice look like, medium term, draft an accessibility workplace policy, and then once there's a plan, the senior staff feels confident in, you know, bring it to council for consideration. And the second one is for the short term is share citizen feedback with Strait Area Chamber of Commerce about the issues people face with regard to disabilities and finding employment. Meet in the medium term, meet with the chamber. We would have them potentially come and see us at the Accessibility Advisory Committee, you know, and also identify other stakeholders, like who else has mandates with regard to the organization around accessibility, jobs, and like we're thinking specifically of the Rock Society as being a potential stakeholder. And, you know, is there an opportunity to partner to put on an accessibility job fair? So that's something that we consider for the medium term. Long term, We really like this idea as a committee. Again, going back to that theme of let's celebrate success, like let's really, acknowledge and celebrate businesses who are leading by example. So we would like to see a town-sponsored accessibility recognition award. So when the Strait Area Chamber of Commerce has their awards for businesses, let's celebrate businesses who are leading by example and doing accessibility the right way from a hiring perspective, but also from an accessible workplace perspective as well. And that concludes our all of our recommendations and the themes, and then we'll hand things back over to Matthew.
All right, thanks, Brenda and Lori. I wanted to mention before we get to the concluding thoughts, just how much work that the committee put into this plan. Since before the holidays, our committee decided we'd need to meet weekly to get this plan completed on time. It was a big commitment, and I know that Brenda and I appreciated all the time that the committee has dedicated to this project. So a huge thank you to the committee. Concluding thoughts. The PHAAC encourages council to use this accessibility plan as both a resource guide for future accessibility work and as a living document to prepare for Hawkesbury for 2030. We can build on this work together and continue to drive the changes needed to create a more equitable and inclusive town. Approving this plan will be an important first step in making for Hawkesbury a town for everyone. So to conclude with some final thoughts from our committee, we want to encourage council to use this accessibility plan as both a resource guide for future accessibility work and as a living document to prepare for Hawkesbury for accessibility targets for 2030. We can build on this work together and continue to drive the changes needed to create a more equitable and inclusive town. Our committee feels that approving this plan will be an important first step in making for Hawkesbury a town for everyone. Our committee is excited to see the town transform with accessibility work and collaboration. I'll now turn it over to Brenda for next steps.
Thanks, Matthew. So now, so I guess in terms of next steps, so once the accessibility plan is approved, and this is an opportunity for council to offer feedback. Is there anything you'd like to see changed or amended? Is there something you think that we may have missed? Any kind of amendments you think we should be making to the plan? And we have an opportunity to make those needed changes before we bring it to council for review at the public meeting in April. But once we do have the plan approved, we can begin short-term recommendations that will require work from town staff and council and our accessibility committee, and then other potential stakeholders. And then in the short, medium, long-term goals can be tracked as discussed in a standing item every month at our committee of the whole. This will allow staff and council to continue to be engaged after the accessibility plan is approved for the duration of the plan's lifespan. And as a committee, we are recommending that the lifespan be a 3-year period. So we'd be looking at the coverage being from 2022 to 2025. And with that, I guess the final slide is just, we would love to open up the floor for questions, for feedback. We'll start with Mark. You look the most excited.
Yeah, it's a very good presentation. You can see where the committee has put a lot of time and effort into it. And I'm sure that we'll take a lot of it into consideration and move forward with the plan. So thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
I'll echo Councillor McIver's comments about the work put into this. It was a great presentation. Obviously, this wasn't done in a week or two. So I'll start off by thanking the whole committee for their work. I've been taking some notes and I do have a lot of questions, unfortunately.
That's okay.
The first one, automatic doors, and then you had mentioned that you'd like to see an automatic door up on the second floor going into the walking track. Are there any other automatic doors at the Civic Center that you thought should be in place?
So that was the one that we wanted to prioritize the most. And then I guess, and part of the short-term recommendations were for staff to kind of identify, what other high traffic entryways within the Civic Center, would be recommended for automatic door installs. And of course, being mindful of budgets, et cetera, what are the programs that we can be able to leverage some money in and around that. But we thought that if there were anything in the budget around an initial automatic door install, that would be kind of the most important one, because it's that direct access from the elevator to the second floor, for people who want to, access the accessible seating to watch a hockey game or whatever have you. It was actually a happy site. Yeah. You picked that one out.
Big secondary would maybe would have been the interest of the gym.
Yeah.
Okay.
And go from there.
The skyboxes you touched on, and really there's not a lot of demand right now. But if there were a demand, what would you recommend putting in for the skyboxes?
I think the only logical recommendation would be a person lift by means of either an elevator or some sort of a lifting device.
So like a chairlift, or?
It's not just for chairs, it's for all types of mobility, but I think the elevator would cover most disabilities.
Parking at the Civic Center. We have 4 parking spots designated now. Am I hearing you'd like to have more designated?
No, some of the issues that were discussed, or some of the information that came forward to our committee around the issues with our parking lot, is a lot of it had to do with winter maintenance. So, oftentimes our parking lot is cleared, but the ramp getting onto the walkways and the walkways themselves aren't always cleared. So a lot of the kind of issues that were earmarked in the research, really, like in speaking about those and talking about priorities, like Gordy indicated that a lot of that can be really resolved in-house, just around, creating scheduling around, winter maintenance and that sort of thing. And the other issue was we talked about it in all the ways we consume, is in people parking and blocking that ramp to access, to gain access into the building. I mean, that's happening often here at the Civic Center. It's happening in front of Sobeys, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's happening in front of Walmart, and and people who are taking the time. I mean, like Matthew, like you're getting out of your truck and getting in your wheelchair, and then you've got this car blocking the only way for you to, the off ramp to get onto the walkway.
So what would your recommendation be to resolve that?
I guess.
Well, I think we've made some great strides with council support in the last 4 or 5 years when we moved our accessible parking from the center of the lot to closer to the building. We added transfer aisles, and so people don't have to they don't have to cross the vehicle path of traffic to get to access to the building, and we're much better off that way than we've ever been. There's 2 additional ramps that came along with those parking stalls being closer to the building. I think the biggest deal would be try to have some type of better signage or something on that other. A lot of people that don't have accessible parking permits will stop in front of the other ramp and more or less block it. Whether maybe we move our deliveries to a back door, or maybe we have some sort of a different form of enforcement for parking during bigger events and stuff like that. It just takes one car to block that extra ramp, and it backs it up for everybody.
Is there a time of day that you're hearing feedback about the snow removal? And the reason I ask that is I do see our public works here at 6 a.m. every morning salting and plowing.
No,
The Civic Center staff is out shoveling at 6 in the morning clearing. So is there a time of day that we have a gap, or is it depending on the snow events?
So there wasn't a huge amount of feedback on that as an issue. I mean, that was like, not like blocking access and not like, some of those accessibility, challenges with the automated doors. That was like maybe, I want to say 3 or 4 people just mentioned, and it wasn't this necessarily the Civic Center, it was the provincial building and being able to get out of their vehicles, maneuver around that, I don't know what you call it, to be able to try to get into the provincial building. I mean, so it's not just that, like, not to pick on the Civic Center at all, but there's certain things that we can control as a council through policy and in-staff work. And then there's like, probably we'll have to like tap other people on the shoulder where some of those accessibility challenges are occurring. But yeah, so like there might have been maybe 2 or 3 at the most who just mentioned that it's not necessarily the plowing the parking lot. It's plowing, having a clear parking lot and a clear path. So it's almost like, is there a way to make sure that there's a little bit more unison around?
Yeah, we've made, we altered our manual snow clearing schedule once that survey feedback came back to us in December. So we do things a little different out front, even
I've noticed.
as their snow disappeared, or as long as we head into the rest of this year.
The citizens are already,
So I think
making a positive impact on
Yeah,
staff
so
practices.
it's all good. We'll take it very constructively and appreciate the feedback. But I think overall, we've made some really great strides in parking, whether it's at the playground or the fountain park. Excuse me, the access to our AP path down below. And, we've got the opportunity to do that at Sunset Park and the waterfront as we move forward, so.
I think Gordy has been trying to check off as much boxes before we even got in front of you guys here tonight.
No, that's great. I appreciate it all.
I mean, I'm not gonna call him a show.
I only got 4 or 5 more. The sidewalks, I just want to bring to the attention that council just approved a capital budget.
Yeah.
And there'll be a lot of sidewalk work done this year. And there's no doubt that it does need to be done. The old Sydney and Reeves intersection and all the intersections really along Reeves Street. Councilor McDougall and I sit on a committee, sit on a committee, and we've brought that forward to the province. So this isn't the first time that we've heard about it, and the province has heard about it. So hopefully we can push that on a little quicker. The accessible housing, I can say that Cape Breton Island Housing Authority is in the process of having one house done on Tamarack Drive. I think it would be a great idea for your committee to write a letter to the province concerning this situation and get some firsthand experience.
First voice narratives.
And send that along, and you can even send it to council, and we'll send a support letter with that, I'm sure.
Full rate of.
Sure.
That's a great suggestion.
And again, the cars blocking the entrances, I see it all the time, obviously, and especially at the end of the month. So maybe we reach out to our RCMP committee and have them bring that forward as a part of the solution.
Great idea.
That during the last 3 or 4 days of the month, have a little extra presence in the parking lots and really enforce the designated parking for one, and maybe get people out of the fire lanes in front of our businesses on those busy days. And my last one is committee of whole. Do you feel it's necessary every month, or would every second month be suffice?
So my thoughts were around that, and certainly Gordy or Matthew, if you have any ideas or thing. My thoughts are keep it as a standing item. If there hasn't been any progress, obviously there's not a whole lot to share. But if there is, say for example, if we, for the very first maybe committee of the whole, just review only not what we want to, not that we want to meet with Food Bank or that we want to meet with Straight Area Chamber of Commerce, just basically the items we know that's going to require any kind of council approval or any decision making with regard to council. Those are the things that would kind of land on our agenda for review. And something that either Gordy or myself, can just, if there's anything that we need to share, just to keep council in the loop. and just to make sure that we're continuing to move our accessibility goals forward.
So just before I finish up, I do want to once again say that I'm very supportive of this. And again, I appreciate all the work that the whole committee has done. You know, everybody's volunteering their hours for this, and it's really going to help Port Hawkesbury move forward. So with all the questions, I don't want to sound negative, but there were just questions that come up, and I do support this 100%. Thank you.
Jason?
Well, your worship, I guess my only comment being to echo what the councillors, Deputy Mayor McCoy and Councillor McIver has said, that I appreciate the work that you and Matthew has put into this in terms of leadership and Gordy's input and Kathy's and the other members of the committee. Because as I understand, in a lot of communities, and we talked about this back in September, how ambitious timeline this is going to be, because other communities have done these accessibility plans, and they've taken a year to get done, and they've utilized consultants to assist with doing the project. But you folks took it on wholeheartedly, and we have a really, really good plans. Just want to congratulate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor Corey. And also, just to comment on your, I guess, update with regard to our super ambitious capital plan around sidewalk and ET trail development. I did share that information after our capital budget was approved with our committee. Seeing as we got really friendly once every week, every Monday, they're like, again. So I did share that with the committee, and you know, they're like super appreciative that council has taken you know, such an assertive plan for sidewalk replacement. I guess I would be lying if I didn't say the sidewalks were like quite literally mentioned by every single survey responded, every single one-on-one interview, whether it's with citizens or whether it's with all of our stakeholders. You know, like even NSCC was a wonderful stakeholder to have some accessibility kind of knowledge and feedback imparted onto our committee. You know, certainly, and also like our taxi company provided some really great feedback, Straight Area Transit, the Leaside Society. Like, so I mean, we're quite fortunate that, and we'd be remiss if we didn't, A, thank council for considering this accessibility plan, B, like your commitment that you have demonstrated to date with regard to accessibility, and both that really assertive sidewalk plan is so important. And you know, just even in considering here tonight, like I think this is going to be such a huge step forward, becoming a town that's inclusive and accessible for everyone. And like it's just going to get us that much closer to that goal. So thank you so much to council. I'd be also remiss if we didn't mention all the citizens that took the time to fill out the survey. Like we had like over 90.
Yeah, getting close to 100.
Yeah, and out of those survey respondents, I think it was something incredible, like 89% or something super high. 89% of all the survey respondents were either First Voice or indirectly associated with First Voice, working with clients, etc. So we had such a powerful just a database of information to work with. I mean, that made our jobs so much easier, so much easier. So like we are so fortunate to live in a community that cares about accessibility and that was so generous in giving of their time and their feedback. Thank you to staff for all the time, you know, you've dedicated. Like I think Matthew and I probably felt a little bossy at times, but like you just kept doing the work, so we just kept asking. So maybe thank you to staff. Melissa was phenomenal. Melissa made our survey, like we just feel like this is what we want, and she put it on SurveyMonkey. She was fantastic. So thank you, everybody. This is definitely a team effort.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. I don't know, Gordy, if you want to say.
No, that's it. I think we've always had council support and on accessibility issues that have come up in the more recent year, the last 2 years. So I know we're mandated to have this plan in place and move forward for 2030, but I think it's more of the right thing to do than a mandate for residents of our community. And I just look forward to having council support in the future. So thank you.
And I'll be happy to, we wanted to send his
Yep.
support as well. And that can be great this evening. And that's about it. So I guess if there's no other questions, is there any kind of feedback, I guess, before we finalize the document and send it your way for the public meeting?
I think there's a lot in that presentation.
Yeah, take it.
Give us a day or two to mull it over. If there's anything, we'll definitely send an email out.
Yeah, that's good.
It's for me anyway. I can't speak for everybody.
Sounds good.
So your worship, in terms of the short term, medium term and long term objectives, is there a time frame for those
Yeah.
intervals? Yeah.
We kind of, as a committee, we talked about around like a 6-month mark, and they're not like etched in stone. So like, we're thinking like 6 months-ish. Some of them is gonna be like really short term, some might require a little bit more time. So I mean, we just want to kind of put it in a window just for council to digest. And we understand that sometimes the wheel turns slowly, so maybe some of those short-term goals may, kind of fall into the medium-term goal bracket, and that's fine, as long as we're kind of seeing momentum. And this is a guide and a living document. So there could be something that becomes a much bigger priority than some of the recommendations that we're putting before council. So again, this is a guideline, and if there is something significant that is going to, change our budget or, be some kind of a costing or a policy change, then that is going to come back to the council table for decision.
Maybe through you, your worship, we get a price on the doors,
Absolutely.
what the cost is on the doors to get them.
For the walking back one,
Yeah.
It's approximately 3,000
that'd be
for an interior door.
And that's something we can talk about next budget meeting.
absolutely. Sounds good. So I guess without further ado, I thank everybody for their feedback. And if you have anything in the next couple of days, likely our public meeting agenda will go out next Friday. We hope to have our final copy of our accessibility plan for you to read cover to cover again, should you so wish to do so. And we're happy to, I don't know if there's anything you require from our accessibility committee for our public meeting, or if you require any other presentation or any information, you can definitely send the presentation just as a quicker review. But if you're happy with just if there's any revisions, whatever the most recent, most final copy of the accessibility plan, if that's all that council wishes, then that's fine. But if you wanted me to just do a little Coles Notes version, I'm happy to do that, so just let me know.
I would add that just for council's information, we do have a virtual deadline in the back, which is, I think it's April 27th.
So approval of the agenda, approval of the plan at the next public meeting agenda would get us there in plenty of time. Yeah. Sounds good. All right.
Thank you.
So I guess we just have a few other items. I guess tentatively, is council okay with us moving that forward to the public meeting now?
Yes.
Yes.
Welcome to stay for the rest. It's not very much longer.
Oh, sorry.
We probably scared you enough.
I don't really know, just was nervous as hell.
Oh,
I was like, where do I put my hands?
You did
Great
amazing.
job, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great to meet you.
Take care. All right. So our next item, Deputy Mayor Coyne has left, so because he has a declared conflict and he's gone. He literally left like the wind. Anyway, here we are, taxi policy. So I'll have things over to Terry.
Yes, Your Worship. So we'd like to review two policies tonight. One is the taxi bylaw, and tonight we'll give notice for review and adoption at our next public council meeting on April 5th. Just a little bit of background on taxi bylaw and policy. They're relatively new documents. We adopted them on January 6th, but we did not fully consider the extent of the unpredictability of gas prices and the effect of those prices on taxis. So this is a small change that we'll make just to give flexibility in order to react when we have significant changes in the price of gas. So the changes with respect to fares within town limits, it's called flat rates. We're indicating that flat rates will be reviewed where appropriate and adjusted annually. So you'll still get back an annual report where we can adjust that flat rate. The council will adjust that flat rate. This is the change though. Significant spikes in fuel prices will also cause review and possible adjustment of flat rate. The CAO shall adjust the flat rate when significant spikes in fuel occur to fairly accommodate the unforeseen increases in taxi operating costs. So that's what council had indicated their approach was to be. So this is just to give formal notice that we will bring this forward
At our public meeting.
at our public meeting.
Any
Lots of
questions or comments?
Through you, Your Worship.
Mhm.
So this would, you can increase it and decrease it, right?
Yes.
Okay, and this is enforceable within the town limits, correct?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Any questions?
No.
Perfect. All right.
Okay.
Deputy.
Yes. Okay, so we're on to approved additions. And the first one will be our active transportation resolution.
Yes, Your Worship. So as part of our application for the Infrastructure Canada Active Transportation Fund for active transportation network enhancements in Hawkesbury, we have to have a resolution of council to be able to submit that application. So there was some urgency around that, and thank you for including that on the agenda. So the recommendation for the resolution is, whereas Infrastructure Canada opened applications on January 27, 2022 for the Active Transportation Fund, be it therefore resolved that the town of Hawkesbury approves the submission of the application through the Infrastructure Canada Active Transportation Fund for active transportation network enhancements for Port Hawkesbury, Nova Scotia, at an estimated cost of $650,000. So we have had significant discussions about this project through the budget process, and those capital dollars were carried through our capital budget, which was just recently approved.
Those wishes of council.
I would move the motion, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Question.
Okay, the question has been called. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded? The resolution is approved.
Thank you.
Anything remaining on that item, Terry?
No.
Okay, our next addition is video conferencing policy.
Yes, Your Worship, we've had some discussion at our committee, our working committee, our committee of whole, with respect to video conferencing. So we looked at a policy that was a government framework policy, but the impression of staff was that it was overly complex, and we worked at simplifying that. So we have a simplified version of that was sent out to you for review. I will do just a very quick overview. So it's council video conferencing policy, and there's two parts. So the first part is council or committee meeting held solely through video conferencing. So there's no public attending. We're all on video conferencing like we were all the way through lockdown. So and this wording is directly from the MGA, paragraph 19A. At least 2 days notice prior to the meeting must be given to the public. The public must be able to see and hear the meeting as it is occurring. And meeting participants must be able to see and hear each other. So that's really, and that's the theme that goes right through the policy. Notice to public is fairly severe in that a publication in newspaper circulating in the municipality. So just as a heads up, that does give us, what that means is that we have to have like about a week and a half notice to be able to hold a meeting by video conferencing. And as with everything else, where the mayor determines that there's an emergency, a meeting may be conducted by video conferencing without notice, or really without, or with as much notice as you can get. The other component of this is councilors or committee members attending in-person meetings through video conferencing. So like tonight, if this policy was in place and we had a councilor who wished to join this public meeting, this in-person meeting through video conferencing, these are the criteria that have to be met. So the public is able to see and hear each council or committee member participating in the in-person meeting. So we have to have screens to enable both for presentation and to show very clearly the councilor or committee member that's attending on the screen. The council or committee member is able to see and hear every other council or committee member attending the meeting by video conferencing or in person. So again, all cameras have to be on, mics have to be on, and the public has to be able to see a councilor. Each councilor has to be able to see each other between in person and in video conferencing. The other part of this is appropriate notice is to be given to ensure that video conferencing, to ensure proper video conferencing setup. It does take quite some time to get technology together to be able to pull this together. We're taking bits and pieces of systems and making them work. I mean, we'll gradually improve and get better, but it does take time. So if someone was to call, an hour before the meeting and there's no one around, we may not be able to set that up. So, you know, if you know that you're going to be late, then the more notice, the better. The other one is technical problems, failure to connect or disconnect. Basically, if there's technical problems and you can't get on, you are on the meeting, you're marked absent from the meeting. If technical problems happen during the meeting and you're not able to join fully, then the minutes will reflect when you left the meeting. So that's the basis of the simplified the simplified policy. I will say that this will become part of a procedural policy that were reviewed starting at least 2 years ago that we'll bring back, that talks about conduct of meetings and the committee of whole meetings and committee meetings and all of the work combined into one document that we'll be bringing forward. So that's the notice of, for review and adoption of this policy at our next public meeting.
Okay, so any questions for Terry with regard to, go ahead,
To
Deputy Mayor.
Gary, I have a couple. The first question I have is there a set number of times we can join virtually?
Through you, Your Worship. So there's procedural policy and there's video conferencing policy, right? So that number of times you can join is a procedural issue that should be dealt with when we deal with procedural policy. So that was included in that template from the province because of procedural issues, not because of video conferencing issues. So that's where it'll be addressed on that next bylaw that you look at.
Through your worship. The second question is, do we have to be within the municipality to join on the video conference?
Again, through your worship, no, I mean, that's one of the benefits. If you are away from the region, you would be able to join from.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Any other questions? Councilor Driver?
No, your worship, I'm good.
Councilor McCord?
Through your worship, the carrying number 5, number 2, in terms of posting on the town's accessible internet site in at least 5 conspicuous places in the municipality. Are there identified conspicuous places where the notices would be posted?
To your worship, again, no, we haven't identified the conspicuous places. We'll work diligently to identify those conspicuous.
Back of the stall in the mail's wash.
Right.
This is wording directly from the MGA.
Okay. Don't pick up word here. That's not from me. But it is read.
Looks good. Looks a little better than
Okay,
last.
so just so I guess we understand the process, this again is a notice of this coming forward to our public. So
Yes.
no, unless council wants to make any kind of a motion, or is council happy with it being moved forward to our public meeting?
So I think that's the procedure, isn't it? This is given notice.
That's,
This
7
gives-
days
This
notice.
gives notice.
Yeah.
And then this comes to our public meeting
Yes.
next Tuesday. Okay, very good. So that concludes our additions. I would ask council to consider a motion of adjournment at this time.
Moved.
Moved by Deputy Mayor O'Coin,
Seconded.
seconded by Councillor. You guys have this thing, like, or I'm not doing it, you do it. Seconded by Councillor McQuarrie. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded, meeting is adjourned. Thanks everyone for your time.
Very good.
And thanks, Zach, for joining us.
Yeah, of course, thank
You're like you have a lot of stress representing the entire gallery.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.